They laughed at the black officer's rank before the morning flag was even raised, and 7 minutes later, every badge in that yard would be standing at attention for him. At 6:47 a.m., the training yard behind the Franklin County Police Academy was cold enough to turn every breath into a pale cloud. Rows of recruits stood on the painted asphalt in gray sweatshirts and navy training pants, boots aligned on the white lines, shoulders squared, eyes forward, trying not to shiver. The American flag hung still on the pole near the brick administration building, waiting for the day's first salute. A few instructors moved along the formation with clipboards tucked under their arms and coffee steaming in paper cups. Everything looked disciplined from a distance. Everything looked clean. But discipline can hide a lot when nobody important is watching. Captain Andre Coleman walked through the side gate carrying an old black clipboard and a folded training schedule. He wore a pressed dark blue uniform, polished shoes, and a face so calm it made him easy to underestimate. He was 42, tall but not flashy, with close-cut hair, steady eyes, and the kind of posture that came from years of learning how to stay composed in rooms that expected him to prove he belonged. His captain's bars rested on his collar, bright but not loud. He did not touch them. He did not adjust them. He did not need them to tell him who he was. Officer Travis Boone saw him first. Boone was standing near the center lane with two other instructors, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, and a grin that always seemed to arrive before his judgment did. He looked Andre up and down, pausing on the bars, then on the clipboard, then back on Andre's face. "Captain," Boone said, loud enough for the front row of recruits to hear. "Since when did they start handing those out at orientation?" A few officers chuckled. Not many, just enough to make the air change. Andre stopped beside the painted line, looked at Boone, and said nothing. That silence bothered Boone more than any answer could have. "You lost, Captain," Boone continued, putting extra weight on the title like it was a joke he wanted everyone to understand. Administrative offices are inside. The yard is for people who still remember how to lead from the ground. The recruits stayed frozen, but their eyes moved. Some glanced at Andre's collar. Some looked down at their boots. One young recruit, Emma Brooks, swallowed hard and stared straight ahead, though her jaw tightened. She had heard jokes like that before, the kind people pretended were harmless because no one used the ugliest words out loud. Andre noticed her. He noticed all of them. The ones who laughed. The ones who wanted to. The ones who knew better and still chose silence. Boone stepped closer, smiling now, performing for the yard. "No offense," he said, which usually meant offense was exactly what came next. "But that rank looks borrowed." The line landed. A sharper laugh came from one of the instructors behind him. Andre glanced at the clock mounted above the equipment shed. 6:48, 6 minutes. That was all. 6 minutes before the deputy chief would walk through the rear doors. 6 minutes before the sealed folder in Andre's clipboard became official. 6 minutes before the yard learned that the quietest man on the asphalt was not a visitor, not a transfer looking for approval, not a symbol to mock, but the new commanding officer of academy training and standards. Still, he did not say it. Not yet, because sometimes the truth has more power when it waits. Boone mistook that patience for weakness. Most men like him did. He turned toward the recruits and lifted his voice. "Class, take a good look. This is why you check credentials before you salute anybody. Bars don't make a leader. Paperwork doesn't make a leader. And standing around looking serious definitely doesn't make a leader." Andre's eyes moved across the formation again. The cold air held every word. Somewhere near the flagpole, a metal clip tapped softly against the rope. Sergeant Luis Molina, standing near the east wall, lowered his coffee and straightened without realizing it. He knew enough to be careful. Boone didn't. He was still smiling when Andre finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and clear. "Officer Boone, are you finished?" The yard went quiet. Not because Andre raised his voice. He didn't. Not because he threatened anyone. He hadn't. It went quiet because there was something in his calm that did not ask for respect. It reminded people they should have brought it with them. Boone gave a short laugh, but it came out thinner than before. "Finished? Captain, I haven't even started." Andre looked at him for one long second, then looked back at the clock. 6:49, 5 minutes. He tucked the folded schedule under the clip of his board and stood beside the first row as if he had all the time in the world. And maybe that was what made Travis Boone uneasy for the first time that morning. Andre Coleman did not defend his rank. He let the yard reveal why it needed him. At 6:50 a.m., the yard had become something different from a training ground. It felt like a courtroom without a judge, a place where uniforms stood in straight lines and still somehow failed to understand order. The recruits remained fixed on the white stripes beneath their boots, but every ear was tuned to the space between Captain Andre Coleman and Officer Travis Boone. The morning air was sharp. The flag rope tapped softly against the pole. A truck passed on the road beyond the academy fence, its engine fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence that made every small sound feel important. Boone paced slowly in front of Andre, not because he had a reason to move, but because movement made him look in control. He liked that feeling. He liked the way younger officers watched him, the way recruits stiffened when he stepped near them, the way a joke from his mouth could become permission for others to laugh. To Boone, the yard was not just a place to train. It was a stage, and for years, he had been allowed to perform on it without anyone asking what kind of lesson he was really teaching. Andre saw that immediately. He saw it in Boone's grin. He saw it in the quick glances passed between the instructors. He saw it in the recruits who knew the safest answer was no answer at all. That was the first rule in unhealthy places. Keep your head down, tell yourself it is not your problem, and hope the next joke lands on someone else. Boone stopped a few feet away and pointed his coffee cup toward the formation. "This is what I mean by presence," he said, raising his voice so the back row could hear. A leader does not just walk in with shiny bars and expect the room to bend. He looked back at Andre. Leadership is earned out here, in the cold, on the asphalt, with people who know the job. Andre held the clipboard at his side. His face did not change. "I agree," he said. The answer should have ended the moment. Instead, it irritated Boone. Agreement was not what he wanted. He wanted embarrassment. He wanted Andre to argue, to defend himself, to reveal anger in front of the recruits so Boone could call it attitude, insecurity, overreaction. But Andre gave him none of that. He stood with his shoulders relaxed and his eyes open, listening as if Boone were unknowingly giving testimony. Emma Brooks felt her hands tighten behind her back. She was 24, from Dayton, raised by a school bus driver mother and a grandfather who had served 28 years as a county deputy. She had joined the academy believing rules could protect people if good officers had the courage to follow them. But in her first 6 weeks, she had learned that rules were sometimes loud on paper and quiet in practice. She had seen recruits mocked for their accents, their neighborhoods, their weight, their family names. She had heard Boone call it building toughness. She had watched others laugh because laughter was easier than being next. Now, watching Andre stand there, she felt the strange pressure of a question she had avoided for weeks. When does silence become agreement? Boone turned suddenly toward her row. "Brooks," he called. Her spine straightened. "Yes, sir. Tell me what you see." Emma's throat went dry. She looked at Andre, then at Boone, then back ahead. The safe answer waited in her mouth. A harmless answer. A cowardly answer. "I see an officer, sir," she said. Boone smiled as if he had caught her. "What kind of officer?" The yard tightened. Andre lowered his eyes to the clipboard for half a second, then looked up again. Emma could feel 20 faces around her begging her not to make the morning harder. Boone wanted her to participate. He wanted the lesson to spread through someone else's voice. That was how humiliation worked in places like this. It asked witnesses to become tools. Emma swallowed. "A composed one, sir." The smile faded from Boone's face. Not completely, but enough. One of the instructors shifted his weight. Sergeant Molina's eyes moved briefly toward the administration building. The rear doors were still closed, but the clock above them read 6:51. Andre noticed. Boone did not. He stepped closer to Emma's row, his tone cooler now. Composed does not mean qualified. Andre finally moved, just a single step, placing himself where Boone would have to look at him instead of the recruit. "No," Andre said calmly. "But it is usually a good place to start." The words were simple. No insult. No challenge. Just truth. And for the first time, the lesson Boone thought he was teaching began to slip out of his hands. At 6:52 a.m., the first thin edge of sunlight touched the top of the brick administration building, but the yard still felt cold. Not just cold from the April morning air, not just the kind that slipped under collars and made fingers stiff, but the deeper kind that settled into people when they knew something wrong was happening and no one had decided who would be brave enough to name it. Captain Andre Coleman stood between Officer Travis Boone and the first row of recruits, calm enough to make Boone look louder than he wanted to look. That was the quiet power Andre carried. He did not fill a space by demanding it. He filled it by refusing to shrink inside it. Boone took off his sunglasses slowly, as if removing them would make his stare more intimidating. His eyes narrowed on Andre's collar again. "You talk well," he said. "I will give you that." A few recruits shifted almost invisibly, the way people move when they sense a line approaching. Boone rolled his shoulders and looked across the formation. But talking well is not the same as leading officers. Around here, respect is earned by showing the class you can follow a command before you ever give one. Andre looked at him with the same steady expression. "That is a good principle." Boone smiled. "Good. Then you will not mind helping me demonstrate it." The sentence hung in the air. Emma Brooks felt her stomach tighten. Sergeant Molina's jaw moved once, like he wanted to speak, but knew the morning had already been set in motion by something larger than him. Andre glanced at the clock. 6:52, 2 minutes. He could have ended it there. He could have opened the sealed folder, named his position, watched the laughter disappear at once. But that would only have exposed Boone. It would not have exposed the culture that had protected him. So Andre nodded once. "What do you need demonstrated?" Boone stepped back, satisfied, and pointed toward a row of orange cones set near the south fence. "Basic command response. Nothing complicated. Since you are a captain, I assume you can handle academy fundamentals." There it was again, the polished insult wrapped in procedure. No slur. No shouting. Nothing that would look obvious on a complaint form unless someone understood the tone, the timing, the pattern. That was how people like Boone survived. They hid disrespect inside policy, bias inside jokes, humiliation inside training. Andre handed his clipboard to no one. He kept it in his left hand and walked toward the cones with an easy, measured pace. The recruits watched him move. Not rushed. Not defensive. Not embarrassed. His shoes struck the asphalt with the controlled rhythm of someone who had spent years under inspection lights, in command rooms, at memorial services, in city council hearings where every word mattered. Boone raised his voice. "When I call a direction, you move. When I stop, you stop. Simple enough." Andre turned at the first cone. "Simple enough." Boone's grin returned. "Forward." Andre moved. "Left." Andre turned. "Right." Andre turned again, clean and exact. "Halt." Andre stopped with both feet aligned and shoulders squared. The movement was so precise that the back row noticed before the front row did. A murmur almost formed, then died. Boone's smile thinned. He called faster. "Forward." "Right." "Halt." "Left." "Forward." "Halt." Andre followed every command perfectly, never once looking hurried, never once looking small. The demonstration that was supposed to make him seem unqualified began doing the opposite. Emma saw it first in the recruits beside her. Their faces changed. Curiosity replaced discomfort. Respect replaced pity. Boone sensed it too, and that made him push harder, not louder, but sharper. "Again," he said. Andre looked at him. "Is there a training objective, Officer Boone?" The question was gentle, professional, impossible to punish. Boone paused. "The objective is discipline." Andre held his gaze. Then the class should learn that discipline is not the same as domination. The yard went completely still. Even the flag rope seemed to stop tapping for a second. Boone's face tightened, and for the first time that morning, everyone could see the difference between authority and control. Authority stayed steady when questioned. Control panicked when exposed. From the rear of the yard, the administration doors opened. Deputy Chief Harold Benton stepped out in a dark overcoat, followed by a civilian aide carrying a blue folder marked Training Standards Review. Sergeant Molina straightened fully now. Andre did not turn around. He did not need to. He simply looked at the clock. 6:54, the moment had arrived. Deputy Chief Harold Benton did not hurry across the yard. He walked with the steady pace of a man who had spent 30 years in uniform and understood that real command did not need to chase attention. His dark overcoat moved lightly in the cold wind, and behind him, the civilian aide carried the blue folder against her chest like it contained something heavier than paper. The recruits saw him first, then the instructors, then Boone. A strange ripple passed through the formation, not sound exactly, but recognition. Shoulders rose, chins lifted, coffee cups lowered. Conversations that had not quite begun disappeared before they could become words. Boone turned halfway, and the last trace of his grin held on for one stubborn second before it began to fade. "Deputy Chief," he said, his voice suddenly cleaner, more official, almost polished. "We were just conducting a demonstration." Benton stopped several feet away from him and looked across the yard. He did not answer right away. That made the silence grow. Andre stood near the cones, clipboard still in his left hand, expression unchanged. He looked neither relieved nor triumphant. If anything, he looked disappointed, not in one man alone, but in the ease with which a whole yard had almost accepted the wrong lesson. Benton's eyes moved from Boone to the recruits, then to the instructors who had laughed minutes earlier. "A demonstration," Benton repeated. "That is one word for it." Boone cleared his throat. "Sir, Captain Coleman entered the yard during active training. I was verifying his role before allowing him to interfere with instruction." It sounded reasonable. That was the danger of it. Men like Boone knew how to dress disrespect in professional language after the fact. Andre watched Emma Brooks in the front row. Her face remained forward, but her eyes had changed. She was listening differently now, not just to what was said, but to what was being covered. Benton took the blue folder from his aide and opened it slowly. The paper inside shifted in the wind. "Officer Boone, do you make a habit of verifying rank by public mockery?" Boone's mouth tightened. "No, sir." "Do you make a habit of turning uncertainty into humiliation?" "No, sir." "Do you make a habit of asking recruits to participate in disrespect and calling it discipline?" The question landed harder than the first two because it reached beyond Boone. It reached the row of instructors. It reached the recruits who had laughed because laughter felt safer than conscience. Boone glanced briefly toward Andre, and this time there was no performance in his face. Only calculation. "Sir, with respect, I had no intention of disrespecting anyone." Benton closed the folder halfway. Intention matters. Impact matters too. The yard stayed still. Somewhere beyond the fence, a school bus hissed to a stop at the corner, and the ordinary sound made the moment feel even more real. Life outside the academy continued, unaware that inside this fence, a culture was being measured by the words it thought no one important would hear. Andre stepped back from the cones and returned to the center lane. Boone watched him approach, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that Andre's silence had never been confusion. It had been observation. Benton turned toward the formation. "Recruits, listen carefully. What you witnessed this morning was not toughness. It was not leadership. It was not a harmless joke. It was a test of culture, and culture is what people do before consequences arrive." No one moved. Emma felt the sentence settle in her chest. Culture is what people do before consequences arrive. She knew she would remember it. Boone looked as if he wanted to speak, but the deputy chief raised one hand, not sharply, not angrily, just enough to stop the impulse before it became another mistake. "Officer Boone, your explanation will be documented later. Right now, this yard has a formal transition to complete." Benton turned to Andre. The wind lifted the edge of the folder. The flag rope tapped once against the pole. Every face followed the deputy chief's gaze. Then Benton's voice rose, clear enough to reach the far fence. "All personnel, stand at attention." Boots snapped into place across the asphalt. The sound was clean, sudden, final. Boone straightened with everyone else, but his face had gone pale beneath the morning light. Benton faced Andre fully and gave him the respect Boone had tried to turn into a joke. "Captain Coleman," he said, "the yard is yours." Andre did not smile. He did not look at Boone first. He looked at the recruits, the future officers standing in the cold, waiting to learn what kind of power they were being trained to carry. Then he stepped forward, and the entire yard belonged to the quiet man they had underestimated. For a few seconds after Deputy Chief Benton spoke, nobody seemed to breathe. The command had been simple, but it changed the shape of the entire morning. Andre Coleman stood at the center of the yard, no longer treated as a question mark, no longer framed as an interruption, no longer reduced to the joke Boone had tried to make of him. The same captain's bars that had been mocked minutes earlier now reflected the thin morning light, and every person in formation understood that nothing about them had changed. Only the truth had become official. Andre looked across the recruits first. He let the silence remain long enough for them to feel it, not as punishment, but as a lesson. Silence could protect dignity when a person chose restraint. Silence could also protect wrongdoing when a crowd chose comfort. The difference mattered. At ease, Andre said. The yard released a breath. Boots shifted. Shoulders loosened slightly, but no one relaxed completely. Boone remained near the center lane, trying to arrange his face into something professional. His posture was straight, but his confidence had thinned. He had spent years reading weakness in other people, and now he was learning how easily arrogance could be mistaken for strength until real accountability entered the room. Andre turned toward him. Officer Boone, step to the side of the formation. Boone's jaw moved. Sir, may I clarify what happened? You will have that opportunity, Andre said. Not in front of recruits you were responsible for leading. The words were quiet, but they carried. Boone stepped aside. No one laughed now. That was part of the reversal, and maybe the most uncomfortable part. The same people who had borrowed his courage when he mocked Andre suddenly had none to lend him. Andre faced the class again. What happened here this morning is not separate from police work. It is police work. The way you treat someone when you think they have less power than you is not a private habit. It is a preview. Emma Brooks felt the sentence strike deeper than any shouted order could have. A preview. That was what had unsettled her from the beginning. The joke was not just a joke. It was a window. If a person could turn a fellow officer into a target in front of a formation, what would that person do on a traffic stop with no cameras nearby? What would that person do in a living room after a neighbor called for help? What would that person do to a teenager who was scared, confused, or slow to understand an instruction? Andre continued, his voice steady in the cold air. You will hear people tell you that respect is something civilians must earn from you. That is false. Basic human respect is not a reward. It is the floor. It is where you begin. The flag rope tapped the pole. Once. Twice. The sound seemed to underline him. Authority gives you legal power. Character decides whether you are safe to hold it. Deputy Chief Benton stood behind him, hands folded, watching the recruits absorb what many of them had never heard said so plainly. Sergeant Molina looked down for a moment, not from shame alone, but from recognition. He had served long enough to know how many small moments he had let pass because the paperwork was heavy, the culture was stubborn, and speaking up always came with a price. Andre did not spare the instructors. Every instructor in this yard will submit written accounts of what occurred before noon. Not because I need 20 versions of the truth, but because I need each of you to decide whether your report will protect your comfort or your oath. A few faces lowered. Boone stared at the ground near his boots. The civilian aide opened the blue folder and began making notes. Andre finally looked toward Emma's row. Recruit Brooks. Her heart jumped. Yes, sir. Earlier, you were asked what you saw. You answered carefully. Now I am asking again. What did you see? The yard held still. Emma could have chosen the safest sentence. This time, she did not. Sir, I saw an officer use rank as a punchline because he thought the person wearing it had no power over him. Boone's face tightened, but Andre did not look away from Emma. And what did you learn? Emma swallowed. That the way we act before we know who someone is tells the truth about who we are. Andre nodded once. Remember that. All of you. The sun cleared the roofline then, spilling light across the asphalt, touching the rows of boots, the cones, the flag, the clipboard in Andre's hand. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting. No spectacle. Just a yard full of officers and recruits forced to stand in the daylight with a truth they could no longer laugh away. By 7:03 a.m., the yard had changed, but the lesson was not finished. Andre Coleman knew the danger of a dramatic moment was that people could mistake it for justice. A reveal could silence a room. It could embarrass the arrogant. It could make every person stand straighter for a few minutes. But it could not rebuild a culture by itself. Culture was slower than shock. It lived in habits, in jokes people excused, in reports people softened, in the quiet decision to look away because the person being targeted was not you. Andre had not come to Franklin County Police Academy for one morning of correction. He had come because 3 months earlier, a pattern had crossed Deputy Chief Benton's desk that no responsible leader could ignore. It began with a complaint from a recruit who said instructors were grading attitude more harshly for certain trainees. Then came another complaint from a female recruit who had been mocked for asking a policy question during scenario training. Then a third from a black recruit who wrote one sentence that stayed with Andre after he read it. I can pass the fitness test, the law test, and the shooting test, but I do not know how to pass being seen as a problem before I speak. That sentence had traveled through 3 offices, 2 supervisors, and one quiet meeting before it reached Andre. He remembered sitting in a conference room downtown, the blinds half closed, the city waking up below the windows, while Benton slid the file across the table. "I need someone who understands standards," Benton had said. "Not politics. Not appearances. Standards." Andre had opened the folder and read every page without changing expression, but inside, something old and familiar had tightened. He had seen this before. Not always in the same words. Not always with the same faces. But the shape was the same. A department telling itself it had a few personality issues when the truth was deeper. A training culture that confused fear with respect. Instructors who believed toughness meant humiliation. Supervisors who waited for undeniable proof while small harm became normal. Andre had spent 20 years in law enforcement, and the hardest truth he had learned was that bad culture rarely announced itself with a siren. It usually arrived as a joke, a nickname, a lowered expectation, a warning to stop being sensitive, a laugh from people who knew better. That was why he had agreed to come quietly. No ceremony, no introduction, no advance memo to the instructors. Just a uniform, a clipboard, and the authority to observe how people acted before they knew the consequences. Now, standing under the morning light, he looked at the same yard with the weight of that file behind his eyes. Boone was still off to the side, controlled on the outside but restless in the shoulders. Sergeant Molina stood near the recruits, his face solemn. Emma Brooks kept her gaze forward, but she was not hiding anymore. Andre could see the difference. Benton stepped closer and lowered his voice enough that only Andre could hear. "Do you want to move inside for the formal review?" Andre looked at the rows of recruits, then at the instructors. "No," he said. "They learned the wrong lesson out here. We start correcting it out here." Benton nodded once. Andre walked to the front of the formation. "Recruits, remain at ease. Instructors, front line." The instructors moved forward, slower than usual. Boone came last. For the first time all morning, he did not seem eager to be watched. Andre waited until they were lined up facing the class. The reversal was simple, but everyone felt it. The people who had spent weeks judging recruits from the front were now standing where their own conduct could be examined. Andre raised the clipboard slightly. "This academy exists to prepare officers for public trust. Not public fear. Not personal pride. Public trust." His voice carried across the asphalt without strain. "That means the first standard is not how loudly you can command. It is how carefully you can carry power when nobody can force you to be decent." The words settled over the yard like the morning sun, slow and unavoidable. Boone stared ahead. Molina swallowed. Emma listened as if someone had finally named the thing she had been feeling since the first week. Andre continued. "Today, we begin again. Not because one officer was embarrassed. Not because one recruit spoke up. Because the badge does not become honorable by tradition. It becomes honorable by behavior." Andre let the instructors stand in front of the recruits long enough for the reversal to become visible, not cruel, not theatrical, just honest. The line looked different from this side. Officer Travis Boone, who had spent the early morning using the yard like a stage, now stood with his hands at his sides while every recruit saw him not as a force of command, but as a man being measured by the same standards he had used on others. That was the lesson Andre wanted them to understand. Accountability was not humiliation. Accountability was what kept authority from becoming dangerous. He opened the clipboard and removed a single sheet, not the sealed order, not the full review file, just one page with 6 academy values printed in plain black letters. Integrity, restraint, service, courage, fairness, respect. The words looked simple on paper, almost too simple. But everyone in the yard knew that simple words became difficult when pride, pressure, and prejudice entered the room. Andre held the page up. "These are not wall decorations," he said. "They are not language for graduation speeches. They are operating instructions." Boone kept his eyes forward, but his face tightened at the word respect. Andre noticed and continued without changing tone. "Respect does not mean agreement. It does not mean weakness. It does not mean you ignore danger or stop enforcing the law. Respect means you never forget that the person in front of you is still a person, even when you have authority over them." Emma Brooks listened with her shoulders squared, but inside she felt something loosen. For weeks, she had wondered whether the discomfort in her chest meant she was too soft for the job. Now she understood it might have meant her conscience was still working. Andre turned slightly toward the instructors. Each of you has trained recruits to control a vehicle stop, clear a hallway, write a report, and testify in court. But some of you have failed to train the most important skill of all. He paused. Controlling yourself. The yard was so quiet that the distant sound of traffic on the county road seemed to come from another world. Boone blinked once. Molina looked straight ahead, taking the words like medicine he should have accepted sooner. Andre lowered the page. A person who needs to belittle someone to feel powerful is not ready for power. A person who can only lead when others are afraid is not leading. And an officer who treats dignity as optional will eventually treat rights the same way. The sentence moved through the formation slowly. No one laughed. No one shifted. This was not the kind of speech recruits could dismiss as policy language. It was too plain, too close, too true. Deputy Chief Benton stepped forward then, holding the blue folder. Effective immediately, Academy Training and Standards will conduct a full review of instructional conduct, recruit evaluations, complaint handling, and field readiness recommendations from the last 18 months. A few instructors exchanged quick glances before remembering they were still being watched. Benton continued. Officer Boone will be temporarily removed from instructional duties pending review. Sergeant Molina will assume morning operations under Captain Coleman's supervision. Boone's lips parted as if a defense rose in his throat, but Andre looked at him before it could leave his mouth. Not angry, not satisfied, just clear. Officer Boone, you will have due process, Andre said. What you will not have is continued access to recruits while your conduct is under review. That sentence hit harder than any raised voice could have. Boone had expected embarrassment, maybe a reprimand, maybe a private conversation where things could be softened. He had not expected boundaries. He had not expected the system to stop protecting the performance and start protecting the people learning under it. Andre turned back to the class. This is not about one bad morning. It is about what kind of officers you will become when nobody is applauding, nobody is recording, and nobody knows your name. His eyes moved across every row, and when they reached Emma, she did not look away. The public will not meet your intentions first. They will meet your tone, your patience, your assumptions, and your self-control. Make sure those things are worthy of the badge before you ever ask anyone to respect it. The sun had fully reached the yard now, bright across the asphalt, bright on the flag, bright on the faces of people who could no longer pretend the morning had been ordinary. Andre folded the page and placed it back under the clip. Formation remains. Training continues. But from this minute forward, the standard changes. Then he looked once toward Boone, not to defeat him, but to make sure the lesson was complete. Or maybe, Andre said quietly, the standard was always there, and today we finally decided to enforce it. The first change was small, almost invisible, and that was why it mattered. Sergeant Molina stepped forward with the morning training roster in his hand, but before he gave the next command, he looked back at Andre and waited. Not out of fear, out of recognition. The yard saw it. Boone saw it. Emma Brooks saw it too. And something about that simple pause said more than a speech could have. Authority had shifted, but it had not shifted into cruelty. It had shifted into order. Andre gave Molina a nod. Proceed. Molina faced the recruits. His voice was steady, though lower than usual. Class, prepare for communication drills. Partners assigned by row. Remember, the objective is not to win the scenario. The objective is to resolve it safely, lawfully, and respectfully. Several recruits looked at one another as if hearing a familiar exercise described in an unfamiliar way. Before that morning, communication drills had often turned into contests of dominance. Who could sound the toughest? Who could make a mock suspect comply the fastest? Who could draw laughs from the instructors with the sharpest line? But now the rules had changed, or maybe Andre was right. Maybe the rules had simply been taken seriously for the first time. Boone remained off to the side, no longer part of the instruction, no longer the center of gravity. The absence of his commentary created a space that felt strange at first, then useful. Recruits paired off near the cones, standing 6 feet apart as Molina explained the first scenario. A confused older driver in a parking lot, upset because he could not find his car after a medical appointment. No threat, no crime, just a human being in distress. Your job, Molina said, is to slow the moment down. Andre watched from the edge of the formation. That sentence pleased him. Slow the moment down. Too many bad decisions began when an officer rushed to control what first needed to be understood. Emma was paired with a tall recruit named Daniel Price, who had usually kept his opinions hidden behind jokes. Today he was quiet. Emma played the officer first. Daniel played the driver, frustrated and embarrassed. "Sir, I can see this is upsetting," Emma said, keeping her voice even. "Let us take one step at a time. What is the make and model of your vehicle?" Daniel blinked, staying in character, then answered. Emma listened. She did not crowd him. She did not talk over him. She did not treat confusion as defiance. Andre noticed. So did Melina. When the drill ended, Andre walked over. Emma straightened. "Recruit Brooks," he said. "What did you choose not to do?" The question surprised her. She thought for a second. "I chose not to assume frustration meant disrespect, sir." Andre nodded. "Good. Assumptions are fast. Professionalism is slower." Daniel looked down, absorbing the line. Across the yard, another pair of recruits stumbled through the same scenario. One recruit became impatient, cutting off his partner twice. Before Andre could speak, Melina stepped in. "Reset," he said. "Try again. Listen first." The correction was firm, but not degrading. No jokes. No public shaming. Just instruction. The difference was almost startling. Boone watched it all with his arms at his sides, his face unreadable. For years, he had believed fear made training sharper. But from where he stood now, removed from the center, he could see something he had not allowed himself to see before. The recruits were not weaker without humiliation. They were clearer. They were learning. Deputy Chief Benton stood near the flagpole, speaking quietly with the civilian aide as she wrote notes. The blue folder was open again. This time, it did not feel like a threat. It felt like a record. A promise that what happened in a place like this would no longer disappear into memory and hallway whispers. Andre returned to the front of the yard. "Bring it in," he called. The recruits formed a half circle around him, still disciplined, but less rigid than before. Their faces were alert. Not scared. Alert. Andre looked at them for a long moment. Every person you meet on this job will come with a story you do not know yet. A bad day. A medical issue. A language barrier. A fear of uniforms. A memory that has nothing to do with you but will shape how they hear your voice. You cannot control all of that, but you can control whether you add dignity to the moment or take it away. Emma felt the cold air in her lungs and the weight of the badge she had not earned, yet waiting somewhere in her future. Boone lowered his eyes. Melina stood straighter. And the yard, which had begun the morning with laughter at one man's rank, now listened as if the real training had finally started. By 7:28 a.m., the cold had begun to lift from the yard, but nobody had forgotten how the morning started. The recruits stood in their half circle around Captain Andre Coleman, not with the stiff fear that had filled the air earlier, but with the uneasy attention of people who knew they had witnessed something they would be expected to carry with them. The cones were still lined along the south fence. The flag moved gently now, touched by a breeze that had not been there before. Sunlight spread across the asphalt in long, bright strips, turning the academy yard from a place of exposure into a place of possibility. Andre let the recruits look at him. Not the bars on his collar. Not the clipboard in his hand. Him, a black officer who had been mocked before breakfast and still refused to answer disrespect with disrespect. A commander who had every right to embarrass the man who embarrassed him and chose instead to teach the entire yard why that choice mattered. "Before you leave this formation," Andre said, "I want you to understand something about rank." The recruits straightened slightly. Boone stood near the side with Deputy Chief Benton and the civilian aide, no longer leading, no longer performing, just listening because there was nowhere else to hide. "Rank can give you the authority to speak first," Andre continued. "It can give you the authority to make decisions, sign reports, assign duties, and lead a room. But rank will never give you the right to forget someone else's humanity." Emma Brooks felt the words settle over the morning like a final layer of meaning. She thought of her grandfather, who used to polish his old deputy badge on Sundays even years after retirement, not because it gave him power anymore, but because he said it reminded him of promises. Promises to strangers. Promises to frightened people. Promises to people who might never know his name, but would remember how he made them feel when they needed help. Andre turned toward the instructors. "Some of you will be uncomfortable today. Good. Discomfort is not harm. Sometimes discomfort is the first honest sign that growth has a chance. Molina lowered his eyes briefly, then lifted them again. He did not look defensive. He looked ready. Boone did not. His face remained controlled, but the control no longer looked strong. It looked lonely. Andre saw him, but he did not make Boone the center of the ending. That would have been too easy. This moment belonged to the recruits, to the future, to the quiet correction of a place that had forgotten what it was supposed to build. Deputy Chief Benton stepped forward. Class dismissed to Classroom 2 in 10 minutes. Sergeant Molina will supervise. Written reflection due by the end of the day. What does public trust require when no supervisor is present? A few recruits nodded. Some looked nervous. Others looked thoughtful. Emma looked at Andre and, for the first time since joining the academy, felt that the standard she hoped existed might actually have a voice. As the formation broke, no one rushed. Conversations stayed low. Boots moved across the asphalt, but the usual joking did not return. Not yet. Maybe that was good. Maybe silence, when used correctly, could become a place where conscience spoke. Boone remained where he was as Andre approached him. For a second, the yard seemed to narrow around the two men. Boone's eyes flicked to the captain's bars, then to Andre's face. "Sir," Boone said, the words stiff but real. "I was out of line." Andre studied him. "You were," he said. "No cruelty. No comfort. Just truth." Boone swallowed. "What happens now?" Andre glanced toward the recruits entering the building, then back at Boone. "Now you decide whether being corrected makes you bitter or better. The review will handle your position. Your character is still your responsibility." Boone had no answer. Maybe there was no answer that would have meant anything yet. Andre stepped away and walked toward the flagpole, where Benton waited with the blue folder closed beneath one arm. The yard behind them looked ordinary again, but it was not. A place changes when people can no longer pretend they did not see. Emma paused at the doorway of Classroom 2 and looked back once. Andre stood in the sunlight, calm as ever, his clipboard at his side, his rank no brighter than it had been before, only understood differently. And years later, when Emma would stand beside a patrol car speaking gently to someone having the worst day of their life, she would remember that morning. She would remember the laughter, the silence, the command, the way every badge in the yard snapped to attention. Most of all, she would remember the lesson that changed her understanding of power forever. He thought rank was something to laugh at, but that morning, rank became the mirror that showed everyone who they really were.